Good morning, evening, afternoon, everyone. I am Dorm. This is Dorm Streams, and welcome to something a little different. As 2019 comes to a close, I thought it'd be a really fun idea, as I've seen other media outlets do, to recap my 100 games of the decade. Now, before we start, I just want to give you a little rundown of my process of how I decided the games in this list. I basically took every notable game that I have played. That'll be a factor for sure. Every notable game that I've played over the past decade and assembled that into a list. That was a list of about 177 games. So then what I did was I organized the spreadsheet and put what I thought was the number one game of the decade at the top, and then started pulling games into that list and basically saying, is this game better than the game above it, or is it worse than the game below it? That is kind of how I did it. Now, better is sort of an objective thing, of course, but for me, it kind of encapsulated a lot of different things. So was the game really fun? Did the game have a great story? Do I have personal connections with the game? That is factoring in. This is my 100 games of the decade. I don't expect this to be a universal list or a list agreed on by experts or anything like that. This is just my personal list. And as such, I wanted to factor in all the personal parts of that. An important thing to say here, I got really into games at 14-ish, which just so happens to coincide with the start of the decade. So there are a lot of games, especially early on in the 2010 to 2015 range, that I just did not play. I'm going to scroll some notable series or games that I've not played beside me here. Those are just a portion of the games that are going to be left from this list. I am just one person. This is not some conglomerate agreeing upon the 100 best games of the decade. So these are my personal picks. If you see a game left out, it's possible it got left on the cutting room floor of those 77 that got cut from the spreadsheet, but it's also possible I either plan on playing it but haven't heard of it, or just haven't played it. So that is sort of the outlook of this list. This is my personal list. Hopefully some of your favorites are on here, but there are going to be games that are left out, and I just wanted to approach that at the top. This list is extremely subjective, as we've kind of touched on. This is, again, my 100 games of the decade. I don't want this to be said as the 100 greatest games of the decade, or even the 100 most influential or most fun. These are just the 100 games that I think are notable from the decade in some way, and the matter of best comes down to a bunch of different things. Again, how much fun did I have? How much did the story impact me? Things like that. So without further ado, let's get into my 100 games of the decade, starting with number 100, Moonlighter. I actually found Moonlighter this year in Xbox Game Pass. A friend of mine, shout out to Koala, sent an Xbox over so that I could play some games for stream. And in that, I signed up for Game Pass. And I was just looking around for something to play off stream, some little game. And I had heard some recommendations for Moonlighter. I didn't know much about it, but the gameplay and the aesthetic looked up my alley, so I got into it. This may be recency bias at play, because this is a game I am still currently playing. But this game, as I was ranking stuff, just kept beating other games out. In the game, you play as Will, a young fellow looking for an adventure while running his family's shop, the Moonlighter. As Will, you stock the stores, set the prices, and in charge of maintaining orderly business. How do you get that inventory? By throwing yourself into procedural-style dungeons at the end of town. Part Link to the Past, part shop manager, I guess. This game has found one of the most addictive gameplay loops of any game I've played this decade. There's just this wonderful repetitive nature of going into the dungeons at night, getting as much inventory as you can, managing your inventory to keep the most valuable stuff, going back to the store, setting prices, taking care of your customers, upgrading the store with that money, upgrading your gear with that money, using your better gear to go deeper into the dungeons, get more expensive stuff, etc., etc. You can see kind of how that would become cyclical, and it is one of the most fun gameplay loops. This is one of my favorite games to play while watching streams, while listening to podcasts. It is a wonderful experience for just that sort of repetitive scratch the itch kind of game. So yeah, play Moonlighter. It is absolutely wonderful. The aesthetics are gorgeous. The music's really good, but as I said, it's a great game for listening to other things while you play it. I cannot recommend this game enough. Number 99, Octodad, Dadliest Catch. Octodad is just plain stupid. There is no other way to phrase it. It is one of the dumbest concepts for a game I've ever seen, but there has never been an occasion where I've talked about this game, recommended this game to a bunch of different types of people, where they haven't at least laughed at the absurdity of it, and that is the perfect encapsulation of why Octodad made this list. It was kind of in an era of a lot of meme games that were meant for playing with friends or playing on a YouTube series perhaps, or streaming. But I think the thing Octodad does better than a lot of those games, like Goat Simulator, for example, is it actually has a story and a universe, and a lot of that is very charming on top of the ridiculous, wacky stuff. So those two elements combined, if you don't know the idea of Octodad, it is that you are an octopus who is a dad, but no one knows you're an octopus. And the gameplay basically boils down to you control each limb of the octopus. Well, 2 arms and 2 legs. The rest of them are bundled up in your suit, I believe. But you control your 2 arms and your 2 legs each separately. So that results in this weird, wacky running with all of your arms and legs and just flailing into different places throughout the game. And they give you a lot of fun, stupid puzzles to solve. This game is absolutely silly, but I think it is one of the best absurd games I've ever played. I have such a good memory with this game. I played it in a sitting with my former roommate, Jay, and we had such a fun time with this game that it is definitely coloring my opinion of it. But I think it would be a game sadly lost to time if not mentioned in a list like this. And I think it is imperative that if you like meme games, if you like silly games, this game is incredible. Also, you can play it. I played it with Jay. You can play it co-op locally where each of you control opposite limbs. It is a shit show. It's hilarious. And it's so fun. Play Octodad. It's hilarious. Number 98, Virginia. Virginia is a game that snuck up on me, frankly. As you can see in this list, or as you will see rather, I am a sucker for an incredible narrative game. I love what people call walking simulators. I think those games are a really nice way of telling a narrative, of experiencing a narrative as the player. Virginia is no different. What I think Virginia does differently than some other games in the genre is it is not afraid to tackle really directly some very important issues and showcase them in a way that you maybe haven't seen them showcased in a medium before. In Virginia, you play as an FBI agent who is assigned to her first task by finding this missing boy in Virginia. And it tackles a lot of things through flashbacks and through Pulp Fiction style storytelling in certain regards that are really interesting and I think worth telling. It is one of the more serious games on this list. I would not recommend it to someone who didn't like serious storytelling. It plays out, maybe of any game on this list, the most like a movie. It is a very cinematic experience. I love some of the shifts in the visuals in the game. The visuals are fantastic, by the way. They're so unique. You can spot Virginia screenshots from a mile away. And this game is just very blunt in its approach of subject matter, but I think that is to be recognized and to be heralded. So that is why I put Virginia at this point on the list. I think there are other narrative games that I enjoyed the story of more, but I think Virginia may be the most cinematic of those games. And for that, it gets the 98th spot on this list. Number 97, Sound Shapes. The year is 2012. Music games are pretty much dead by this point. Guitar Hero, Rock Band, they're still kind of alive and kicking, but basically they have run their course. What if we take a music game, but make it a platformer, and each element of the platformer, each of the collectibles you can get, advance the beat along and add other instrumentation or other elements to the song? That is the pitch for Sound Shapes. One of the first indie games I really remember playing on PlayStation. Sound Shapes is incredible. It has a wonderful trophy list, which is one of the reasons I love that game so much. I platinumed it. But it also is just one of the more intriguing games on this list. I've never played another game like Sound Shapes. The visuals are very simple but beautiful in sort of a minimalist way. The audio design is incredible, as it must be in a music game like this, or a game so centralized around music. And the collaborations are surprising. There are songs from Beck and from Deadmau5, among others, on this soundtrack. And they each have level packs that the visuals sort of revolve around the way the music sounds. It's a wonderful game. Sound Shapes is definitely one to look for if you've never heard of it. And it is just a joyous playthrough that I think anybody would enjoy. Number 96, VVVVVV. I hope I got the number of V's right. So VVVVVV is an indie platformer with a pretty simple mechanic. You can press the V button, or I think spacebar, on PC to invert gravity. And you play as one of these V characters. Each character in the game starts with a V. Your spaceship has crashed, and it is your goal to find your fellow crewmates on the ship. VVVVVV is so inventive in the way it just takes that gravity flipping formula and flips it on its head. I did a pun. It is one of the hardest platformers early on that I've ever played. It really does not hold your hand with the mechanic. It goes pretty hard pretty quickly, but it is a game I find myself playing through because it's relatively short. I find myself playing through it once every 3 or 4 years just on a whim. The soundtrack is incredible. One of the best soundtracks of the decade for sure, and I think maybe in gaming. The visuals are simple, but they absolutely work. And the gameplay is just so addictive. There's a sequence in VVVVV that you're ascending a tower, basically. And that sequence is still one of my favorite sequences in gaming that I've experienced the entire decade. It is so well made. It's hard but fun. You never get tired of the quick death respawn, go again, death respawn kind of mechanic. And I just love that sequence so much. And the music in it's great. VVVVV is awesome. Absolutely give it a shot. And it's normally on sale a lot. So there's your recommend. Number 95, Hex Cells. I'm willing to bet there are few lists, if any, of games of the decade that include Hex Cells. But Hex Cells is one of my most played games of the decade, as well as one of the most soothing games I've ever played. So this is basically Minesweeper, but awesome. Think if a really talented indie dev made all of the Windows games, except for 3D Space Cadet, because that game's awesome anyway. But it is a math-based puzzle game. I know I've just alienated some of you by saying that, but it follows such a rhythm. It does such a good job, as all good puzzle games do, of teaching you its mechanics and then expanding on those mechanics throughout the game, that if you were to try to play the last set of levels at the beginning of the game, it would read like a foreign language. But by the time you get to it, you understand what's happening. It may take you an hour to complete some of the last puzzles in Hex Cells, but it's absolutely worth it. It is one of the best games for just having on while you're watching something, as Moonlighter is, as I mentioned earlier. It is one of those incredible games that you can just play and have in the background and just come back to it every few minutes, almost like a jigsaw puzzle. And the feeling of completing the later levels of Hex Cells, and I'm kind of combining all of the Hex Cells games. There's a bunch of different ones, but they basically all follow the same formula. They just add different puzzle mechanics. The feeling of completing those later levels in each of the Hex Cells games is like putting the last piece of a jigsaw puzzle in a jigsaw puzzle. It is that same breath of fresh air and relief and victory that you get from a jigsaw puzzle. Hex Cells is such an easy recommend for me, and it is the 95th game in this list. Number 94, Spelunky. I'm going to be real honest here. I never made it past the jungle level set of Spelunky. It's incredibly hard, and I played at a time where I was very bad at games. That's just now. That being said, it's hard not to adore Spelunky. It is basically Indiana Jones, but procedurally generated, and I think that's a pitch good enough to convince a lot of people to play it on its own. Spelunky is also one of the first indie games I remember being very popular. It's also one of the first procedurally generated games I remember being very popular. It has a very simple gameplay mechanic of just trying to get deeper and deeper into the mines, or the whatever the setting of your levels may be. But it is one of those games that you keep thinking, oh, I can do better than that. Oh, I'll do better next time. Oh, I got it next time. I understand what's happening here, and I'll get it next time. And you just keep trying to beat yourself. It is, in a way, similar to arcade machines trying to top your own score. But in this case, it's trying to see more of the game, to get further and further through the levels. It is incredibly hard. One of the hardest games on this list, I would suggest. But it is so satisfying to play, and a game that is always not too far from the back of my brain when thinking of lists like this. I do have in my notes here, I described the difficulty level as aw shit hard. I feel like that's apt, but it's a good aw shit. Number 93, Undertale. Undertale is one of the strangest stories I have with any game on this list. I remember playing the Undertale demo, I guess in 2015, when I watched Nerdcubed play Undertale on his YouTube channel. And I remember playing it then and thought, this is cute. This was a fun little experience. The music was great. The character design is really cool. But it never really grabbed me. Fast forward to last year when I finally played Undertale for the first time legitimately. And I was enamored with it for the first few streams. So I played through it all the way on stream. everything that I didn't really feel like coming back to. The gameplay was kind of foreign to me. I'm not as someone who plays a lot of turn-based RPGs at all. And so that was sort of the barrier that kept me out, but people kept recommending it, kept talking about how good it was. It's a game that has definitely gone to cult status as far as that goes. And people adoring that game so much made me give it a shot. And I was adoring it as well. I loved the puzzles. I thought the character design is probably one of the best games of character design in the decade for sure. So many iconic characters that people can just immediately spot, no matter if it's in the same art style or not. And I loved the music. I thought the gameplay was fun enough. I loved the sort of puzzle aspect of trying to figure out how to pacifist beat a level or an enemy. But then I played it on the last stream. I was about to finish the game, and the Undertale community reared its ugly head, and people started lambasting me for not completing the game to their liking the way they wanted to play. If you've never played Undertale, it does have all of these things going for it, but it also has a mechanic where, depending on how you approach the enemies, you get different endings. You can get a pacifist ending, a sort of like bloodthirsty ending. I don't know what that's called, but depending on how you fight the enemies, you can get those endings. But I had no idea about this sort of need to play it so purely. I was going for mostly pacifist, but I killed a few enemies in the beginning simply because I didn't know that was a mechanic. And I thought some of the enemies early on were just tutorials to how to kill a thing in the game. So I didn't have a very special ending, and the community was very toxic about that, because apparently to get true pacifist, it has to be your first playthrough or first save on the install or something weird. And that, combined with the, in my opinion, too over-the-top last battle, really soured that game in my experience. It still makes the list because it is one of the most iconic games of this decade, and I think one of the best in a bubble. I think if you're going to play Undertale, keep it away from streaming or YouTube. I would play this game personally, quietly, and alone. I think that is the best way to experience this game and the best way to formulate an opinion. I enjoyed my playthrough, but Undertale to me is very similar to Rick and Morty. I liked Rick and Morty season 1. I thought it was very funny. I think there's some episodes in that show that are great. And then I started seeing the fandom online, and that alone made me stop watching Rick and Morty because I did not want to be associated with those fans. And Undertale kind of has a hint of that too. There are a lot of great Undertale fans, just as like there are a lot of great Rick and Morty fans, but the vocal minority of each fan bases make it a less enjoyable experience, and for that's why it's so low on this list for me. Number 92, Donut County. Whole game good. Number 91, no, I'm just kidding. Donut County is an endlessly charming game, and is probably bizarre to see ranked above Undertale, but previous things set aside, Donut County has so many wonderful things going for it. Personally, this was a game I was gifted by one of my dearest friends, and that obviously is going to enhance the experience. As I said at the top of this episode, personal journeys with the game are going to color my experiences of them. I just think that's the most honest way to do it. But I also think Donut County is a very accessible game. You play as a hole in the ground, trying to solve puzzles by sucking things up. The power of suck is literally this game, and it's amazing. Now, Donut County does have other things going for it too. It's not just the power of suck. The story is oddly compelling in a way I did not expect. The characters are adorable. The art style is gorgeous. And the soundtrack I actually ended up really liking as well. It is one of those indie games that I think everyone deserves to play, and I think would be a wonderful gateway to gaming for some people. Like, I could totally see my little sister, who is not opposed to video games, but also is not like super into them. I could see her sitting through Donut County and playing through them as a 15-year-old girl and loving it. I think this game, and I could also see my mom playing through it. I think this game has a lot of accessibility. It's very easy to understand. I'm the hole. I've got to get things in the hole. How does that help the town folk of this game? Or in some cases, how do I suck them into the hole? But overall, I think this game is very accessible, very cute, very enjoyable, and deserves a spot on this list. And the final game for this episode, number 91, Jackbox Party Pack. I debated for a long time whether Jackbox deserved to be on this list. I'm kind of approaching this with a bit of leeway. I'm kind of considering all of Jackbox one game. If you want me to pick, I'll just pick the first one. but I think they all follow a very similar format. And since they all sort of reference the same website, the same structure, they almost exist and are sold as bundles a lot. They almost exist more as DLC to one another than different games entirely. But Jackbox is, I think, one of the most influential games of the decade for me personally, because it was one of the first games I streamed with chat. I streamed the very first Jackbox Party Pack from the PS4 using the PlayStation camera. And those are very dear memories to me. And also just, Jackbox has this innate ability to bring people together. And what I mean by that is I was at a party a few weekends ago, and we as a group of I have a smaller group of guys that we watch like wrestling and sports with, and we play Jackbox quite a lot just as an end of the night thing, or if we're having a few bevs, we might play some Jackbox. And I was at this party at one of these friends' houses, but there were a bunch of people there that we don't normally hang out with. Girlfriends, just friends that I'd never met, college friends, things like that. And Jackbox, it started as just a few of us playing, and by the end of the night, people who don't play games at all were laughing their asses off at the dumb prompts that we were playing. And I think that just speaks to the power of Jackbox. I've never been to a party or been around my family or been around friends and not have Jackbox work well. I think Jackbox also is one of the most influential games just because it spawned an entire genre of sort of interactive board games that you can play using one controller, and everybody else can be on their phones or just can be playing with the TV. I know it's not the first game to do that, but I feel like it really cemented its legacy with the ability to play with people across the world. For example, for Patreon, we do Patreon gaming night, and a lot of times we just do Jackbox because it's easy, it's fun, and it's always a good time. So Jackbox, I think, deserves to be on this list, not only for the impact it's had on gaming as a whole, but also just the impact I've seen it in my life, where it is such an easy go-to game for a group of people that it's hard not to include it on this list. And that's it. The first 10 are down. We've got 90 to go. There are a lot of interesting games on this list. Let me know what you think of the first 10. I'm going to be releasing these once a week for the next 10 weeks. I know that's a long haul, but the editing, as you can probably tell, takes a long time. And I'm a slow editor at this point anyway. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you to the patrons at patreon.com/stormstreams for being patrons. And subscribe for the rest of my list. As always, take care of the dorm while I'm gone, and I'll see you in the next video.